Hello and welcome to another episode of the Maverick Mystic Arts podcast. In today's episode, we'll be discussing asceticism and how it plays through the spiritual path. Now, ascetic practices can be highly addictive, especially when they're engaged with in the beginning. In the beginning, we're all approaching the spiritual practice from the place of a very strongly held identity. Almost everyone, or you'd be a lot further along in the beginning. So when we enter, we look at the environment that we enter, the culture that we enter, the practices that we're given, and these are often attached to in a very strong way. The identity adheres to them, right? The identity is always looking for stability. So the stability for the identity outsources its stability to these cultural enigmas of different sorts and to, the spiritual or ascetic practices in this case that we're talking about. Now, asceticism has an incredible value in a few ways, but we want to look at these specifically as a tool. So when you're doing practices of an ascetic nature, you are depriving yourself of something, depriving yourself of some habit. And these habits could be both positive and negative. So when you're depriving yourself of a habit, this requires, in the beginning, a type of discipline, right? You are acting in contrast to every pattern that you built. And the energy wants to carry through that pattern, right? There is a direction of movement of the energy. It's used to flowing in that particular pattern, and now you're not doing that, and the energy is still flowing in that pattern, trying to carry it out. And to not fulfill that pattern, right, that can be quite painful, and that requires a lot of discipline in the beginning to engage with that. So, let's say in the beginning you are pretty lazy, or you're used to sleeping really late, these types of things. Maybe one of your ascetic practices might be, for a time, waking up, at 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. And you start to realize over time that what, for a period of time, required tremendous amounts of discipline. I mean, even to the point of, I've heard of people sleeping in the shower so that when or the bathtub, so that when the alarm went off, they could just turn the cold water on and to try to get through this. Once you've gone through the discipline phase of this, then you become free from that pattern, right? You become free from the pattern, and when you are free from the pattern, then it is much easier. Over time, the practice that you've engaged in is a type of willpower or mental function that acts as a means of it's a general with no resistance, right? There's no, there's no lower ranking things that are getting in the way of that action. You say you're going to do something, and then you do it, and there's no resistance. And this can be very necessary for more high-end spiritual work, where the quality and quantity of the dukkha you're experiencing, the suffering you're experiencing as you're transitioning essentially fractals of identity, right? That can be monumentally painful and so subtle. And if the whims of the physical body, if the whims of the emotions, the whims of the mind are controlling you in any way, if they act through you, then to stay on point in that incredible subtlety of those high octane meditative vibrational spaces, you're gonna, as soon as the energy hits one of those nubs, right, bang, you're gone if you can't sustain through that or be free through that, right? So there's a lot of value. However, it's so easy for this to become an addiction in and of itself, right? For the ascetic practice to become the habit, and not just the habit, but also something that the identity rests on. The identity is always looking for something to rest on, a foundation, right? To support it, because then I'm comfortable, I know who I am. And this becomes, ascetic practices can become a very real form of spiritual materialism, which is essentially the proof of concept, right? How we prove the validity of our spiritual work, the proof of concept that we use. So if the proof of concept you use is no resistance to mental, astral, or physical information that might be coming in, okay, yeah, in one sense, boom, I'm free from all that stuff, I do what I say I'm gonna do. But you can not sleep your way right to death's door or through it, right? If we're using this example of waking up early. Maybe some of that information coming in is actually useful. Maybe you are exhausted and you need to sleep. And that practice is actually going to, that ascetic practice is actually going to harm your spiritual path. It will retard the growth and slow the full-on evolution over time because you are engaging in a damaging process. So this is where the discernment quality comes in, right? And discernment is typically in Hermetics associated with the air element, right? With the ability to perceive and to flux between electric and magnetic, the communicating factor, right? And through that communication, we need to be able to actually understand the communication, to pull apart the meaning of it. Because without discernment, you just do a thing. It's no different than any belief system or cultural substructure or identity substructure. Anything that is that we follow for the only reason of following it, because our identity's stuck to it, right? And it's very difficult for people once you've dug a hole deep into whatever the ascetic practice might be. Maybe it's fasting, maybe it's like gratuitous exercise, you know, on and on and on. You can, there's a million different ceremonies and practices that people do that are quite ascetic and designed to push the body, designed for the practitioner to learn that the will is stronger than the impulses of the body. Once this is achieved, then those impulses, like we were saying, no longer control you, you are free from them. That, however, does not mean that those impulses aren't offering you information, and the ability to pull apart this information, to actually perceive the information for what it is, and choicefully and freely act as needed. This is the discernment quality, right? And this discernment quality is of absolute importance when it comes to being able to continue on the path and do so in a healthy way where you're not damaging yourself. Okay? Now, physical practices, the exercises, there's of course, you know, there's so many things that you engage with that are uncomfortable. And this is a big part of why you would engage with ascetic practices, is to train yourself to be able to work within a space of discomfort and sustain within those spaces. Now, depending on the intensity of that stimulus, right, that essentially it's like an exercise stimulus, you will have to moderate your recovery in relation to that. There's a point where you have stimulus and recovery, even in things such as meditation, where I mean, there's a million different kinds of meditation, and all serve a purpose. But let's say you are dissolving your habits, they're falling away, you're releasing all this stuff, the identity's breaking free from its habitual foundational leanings, and you're starting to break free of this stuff, and there's layer after layer of this expansion that occurs, and this recognition that those things are not you, and this keeps going and keeps going and keeps going until you realize that you are not you. And as we work through this, there can be bodily, toxic stuff that's been trapped up within different tensions, a bunch of emotional stuff that was trapped up within different tensions, a bunch of weird mental stuff that was trapped up. Because all this stuff was trapped up, we didn't have to deal with it. But let's say it's a physical thing, and there's an actual, amalgamation of little toxins or whatever that need to move through. That is a stimulus that requires recovery. You have to actually move that stuff through, and it takes energy, right? Just like when you work out, it takes energy to recover. And this recovery this need for recovery applies to the spiritual growth process. And for anyone who is of a more practice-oriented, disciplined persuasion, well, for these types of folks, once you start a practice or have a routine, there's a lot of comfort in just staying with that, right? Because within that discomfort, within that particular practice, there is a known, right? And the crux of so much of this stuff is to really find a developing ability to embrace uncertainty, to exist within the space of a question mark, and to be able to actually amorphously flow through this stuff. You cannot do this until you're ready to do this, and until such a time you follow procedures. However, procedures, they're never the thing that gets you to the thing. They're the thing that you do for a while until you have a realization. And that realization permeates through, and then you have the next thing. But without that realization and that actual development, the liberation, the growth, going through a series of processes doesn't necessarily mean that we are transforming through those processes, right? You can go through processes without the full scope of the transformation. And this is where it can be helpful to have a teacher or someone who has gone through a fair bit of the stuff that you're working on, and they'll kind of recognize, where you're at with it and be able to help you through those particular barriers. Okay? So ascetic practices, they very easily fall into the category of prideful attachments. We want to notice any aspect of ourself that congeals to the ascetic practice. I had a Tai Chi student many years ago who was a psychologist for his whole career, 40 years or whatever. And he had termed this in a really beautiful way, which was, beware the tyranny of your virtues. And this applies not only to ascetic practices, but to any habit of mind, habit of feeling, habit of action, right? What are the tyranny of your virtues? In this case, I'm a worthwhile, valid person because look at the ascetic things that I'm capable of doing. Look how much better I am than my body, than my emotions, than my mind. Look how developed I am. Look what I can do. Now, the tyranny of our virtues, this is it's really applicable everywhere. What do you feel? What's the pedestal, and what are the numerous pedestals that we stand on that we think are virtuous? I'm a good person because I think A, B, and C. I'm a good person because I believe that, this is the right way to live life, and I try to live life this way, therefore I'm a good person. Anytime we are placing ourselves above others, whether it is in nature, in the environment, people, whatever's going on, this is a very good indication that you're existing from an extreme place of separation. And the imprisonment of what we perceive as virtues is one of the things that allows us to do an incredible amount of harm in a justified way. What's that saying? The roads to hell paved with good intentions, right? When we think we are virtuous and we have an identity that's built into a particular thing that means virtue, if you do that thing, then it's a great way to harm a lot of people. So what aspects of our life, of culture, etc., do we think make us virtuous? And what is the tyrannical element of these? How are we trapped by them? How do these virtues inhibit our ability to see truthfully, to feel truthfully, to act truthfully? Right? Truth is not a thing that is held onto. It is underlying of all stuff. So we need to be able to work through this. And there is value in asceticism, absolutely, just as there can be value to exercise, to seeing, oh, I go for a run every day, and that's a good quality. I take pride in that. In the beginning, at the very beginning, yeah, some identity, cohesion to this stuff can help us move along the path. But over time, it has to be let go of so that we can act in truthful accordance with what is needed at the moment. And that is the act of, what's the word for it? I can't remember, but it would have been a great way to close this video. Spontaneous wisdom, we might say. But it can't come from any reasoning, right? Logic, the logical mind, the rational mind will create a tremendously luxurious and sweet tasting facade that is just another prison of tyranny. Okay? Okay, I hope you found this helpful. And if you're interested in training, there is a retreat coming up June 2026. We'll be looking at initiation into Hermetics, going through the full scope of that, into evocation, deity yoga, invocation, and a big chunk of integrative practices, a strong look at the Amrita substance as another tool for karmic burning and integration, rejuvenation as well. Okay, thanks for your time. I'll see you on the next one. Bye.